Picture this. You're walking through a forest. No shoes, no weapons, no phone to call for help. The trees around you are dense, the light is fading, and somewhere behind you, something is watching. Something with 4 legs, 800 pounds, and absolutely no interest in becoming your friend. Now imagine that's just Tuesday. That was life for early humans. Not occasionally. Not as some freak wilderness accident. Every single day. Our ancestors spent hundreds of thousands of years sharing a planet with some of the most terrifying predators that have ever existed. Cave lions, dire wolves, short-faced bears so large they could look you in the eye while you were standing up, and saber-toothed cats with canine teeth longer than your hand. And yet, here you are, watching a video about it, which means somehow, against all reasonable odds, they made it. So how did they do it? How did a species with no claws, no venom, no armor, no real speed, and the upper body strength of a confused librarian manage to not only survive, but eventually become the most dominant creature on the planet? Buckle in, because the answer is weirder, more fascinating, and honestly way more impressive than you probably think. Let's start with what we were actually up against, because most people wildly underestimate the danger. When we think of prehistoric predators, we picture the big flashy ones, the T-Rex types. But the real threats to early humans weren't dinosaurs. Those were long gone. What early Homo sapiens and even our older relatives like Homo erectus had to deal with was a world packed with megafauna predators that have no real equivalent today. Take the cave lion, Panthera spelaea. This wasn't just a big lion. It was bigger than any modern African lion by a significant margin, potentially up to 25% larger. It ranged across Europe and Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, hunting in groups, and it had exactly zero fear of humans. Why would it? We were snack-sized by comparison. Then there was the cave hyena. Now, you might be thinking, hyenas, those goofy scavengers from The Lion King? Here's the thing. Cave hyenas were not goofy. They were enormous pack hunting machines with some of the most powerful jaws in mammalian history. They could crack elephant bones for fun. They didn't just scavenge, they actively chased down prey, competed with lions, and yes, they ate humans. We know this because we've found ancient human bones in cave hyena dens with unmistakable bite marks on them. Sleep tight. Then you had leopards, which deserve special mention because unlike the big flashy predators that get all the credit, leopards were arguably the most persistent and specific threat to early humans. They are ambush hunters. They are silent. They hunt at night. They can climb trees, which means even if you tried to sleep up in the branches to stay safe, a leopard could follow you up. Paleoanthropologists examining the bones of our early relative Australopithecus africanus found puncture marks on skulls that perfectly matched leopard canines. We weren't just prey in general. We were leopard prey specifically, repeatedly over millions of years. And let's not forget the giant short-faced bear, Arctodus simus, which roamed North America and was the largest terrestrial mammalian carnivore of the past 2 million years. We're talking about a bear that could reach speeds of around 40 miles per hour and stood nearly 12 feet tall when upright. Running from it was not a plan. Running from it was a way to die tired. Oh, and crocodiles. People always forget about crocodiles. Ancient crocodilians were even larger than today's already terrifying versions. Some species reached lengths of around 40 feet. And early humans spent an enormous amount of time near water sources for obvious reasons. The overlap between places humans needed to be and places crocodiles were waiting patiently was significant, constant, and frequently fatal. So, the question stands, how did we survive all of this? The first answer sounds almost too simple. Fire. Humans began using fire somewhere between 1 and 2 million years ago, with controlled use becoming more widespread around 400,000 years ago. And while we often think of fire in terms of cooking, which, yes, massively important, changed our diet, increased our caloric intake, literally helped grow our brains over generations, fire was also the single most powerful anti-predator tool in our arsenal for an enormous stretch of human history. Here's the thing about fire that we tend to forget in the modern world, where it's something you click on with a lighter. Basically, every large predator on the planet is instinctively terrified of it. That fear is built into them at a deep evolutionary level. It isn't learned, it doesn't go away, and early humans figured out they could use that. A fire at the entrance of a cave? That's a keep out sign written in a language every apex predator understands. Fire torches waved at an approaching carnivore. Suddenly that predator has somewhere somewhere else to be, urgently. There's archaeological evidence from sites across Africa and Europe showing fire use in caves in a way that strongly suggests this dual-purpose function: warmth and cooking on the inside, predator deterrent at the entrance. Our ancestors weren't just warming themselves, they were actively managing their environment in a way no other prey species had ever done. They weren't reacting to the world, they were reshaping it. But fire alone doesn't tell the whole story, because fire can't follow you into the field. You can't carry a bonfire with you when you're out gathering food or tracking prey. So what happened then? This is where thing number 2 comes in, and it's something that gets criminally underappreciated in popular discussions about early humans: group living and collective vigilance. Early humans were intensely social. Not just we hang out sometimes. Social. Deeply, structurally, existentially social. And this wasn't a cultural preference. It was a survival strategy written directly into our biology. Being in a group dramatically reduces your individual chances of being the one that gets eaten. Simple math. You have 30 people walking across the savannah and a lion is watching. The lion now has to choose. And while it's choosing, someone spots it and raises the alarm. The individual odds just dropped by a factor of 30. This is what's called the many eyes effect. And humans took it further than any other species because, unlike most herd animals, we could communicate with specificity. We could describe a threat. We could say, and I'm paraphrasing here from what was probably a lot of screaming and urgent pointing, "There is a cave lion behind that rock formation to the northwest. It's crouching. Everyone prepare themselves and move left." Other animals can signal danger. Humans could strategize about it in real time. That is an absolutely enormous advantage. And strategize they did. There's compelling evidence that early humans were capable of coordinated mobbing behavior against predators. This is where a group actively turns the tables, making so much noise and potentially throwing so many things that a predator decides the energy cost of pressing the attack isn't worth it. We see this behavior in modern indigenous communities that still live in close proximity to large predators. Coordinated shouting, fire, throwing stones, banging objects together. Aggressive group advances toward the threat. It works against lions. It works against leopards. And it worked then. But here's where it gets genuinely incredible. Humans didn't just defend against predators. They learned to read them. We tend to think of early humans as bumbling around, stumbling into danger, purely reactive. The evidence suggests something very different. These were people who spent their entire lives immersed in the natural world with no other distractions. No phones, no books, no podcasts, just the world and everything in it studied with obsessive attention from childhood. They watched predators constantly, they tracked them, they knew their patterns, their territories, their behavioral shifts across different seasons. An experienced hunter-gatherer from 100,000 years ago would have known the local predator landscape in extraordinary detail, which water sources cave lions used at dusk, which routes hyena packs traveled between midnight and dawn, which areas of tall grass to avoid in the dry season when prey was scarce, and predators were more desperate and more likely to take risks. This wasn't casual observation, this was a lifetime of focused study because the price of getting it wrong wasn't embarrassment, it was death. And this knowledge didn't just live in one person's head, it was transmitted. Stories around the fire weren't just entertainment, they were survival. Manuals encoded in narrative form. Last season, Kira walked too close to the riverbend at sunset and was taken by something. Don't walk there after the light gets low. That story gets told and retold, passed to children, carried for generations, and 100 people across a decade now avoid that river bend at dusk. Cultural memory as a survival tool. It's one of the most underrated aspects of early human intelligence, and it's deeply connected to our unusual capacity for language, storytelling, and the transmission of abstract knowledge across time. And this connects to something even more fascinating: our specific physical adaptations. We often think of humans as being physically weak compared to other animals, and in raw terms, sure, a chimpanzee with our body weight would beat us decisively in a strength contest. A lion wouldn't even notice us as a threat in a direct confrontation. But humans have some very specific physical traits that were, and are, extraordinarily useful in environments saturated with predation pressure. First, our eyes. Humans have visible whites, the sclera, in a way that is almost unique among primates. This sounds like a weird thing to be proud of, but it means we can track exactly where another human is looking without them turning their entire head. In a group moving silently through predator territory, the ability to signal wordlessly where a threat is, purely with eye direction, is genuinely powerful. I am looking directly at the lion in those bushes without pointing, moving, or making a sound, and you can see precisely where I'm looking. Discrete threat communication in complete silence. No other great ape does this nearly as efficiently as we do, and it's likely not an accident. Second, our endurance. Humans are mediocre sprinters. Embarrassingly mediocre, actually. A house cat can outrun us. A horse leaves us behind instantly. An ostrich would lap us. But at sustained long-distance running, humans are genuinely freakish. We can cover distances and durations that exhaust four-legged animals who initially outpace us by a substantial margin. We have specialized tendons in our legs and feet, particularly the Achilles tendon, that function like energy-storing springs. We have a neutral ligament in our neck that stabilizes our head while running, something most other primates lack entirely. We can sweat more efficiently to shed body heat than almost any other mammal on Earth, which means we can keep going when other animals have to stop and cool down. Now, most people think of endurance running in the context of persistence hunting, chasing prey across hours until it collapses from heat exhaustion. And yes, that's real and fascinating, but endurance also matters enormously on the defensive side. A group of humans with strong endurance can follow a predator at a distance over many hours, making noise, keeping it moving, denying it the rest it needs, effectively harassing it off their territory. Territory defense through sustained pressure. And in a direct predator encounter, the fact that you can keep moving long after a sprinting big cat has burned through its energy reserves is not nothing. Most big cats hunt in short, explosive bursts. If they don't make the kill quickly, they abandon the chase. Knowing that and using it, that's strategy. Third, our hands and our throwing ability. Human hands are extraordinary instruments of improvised weaponry. The ability to throw objects with accuracy, force, and distance is something we do unlike almost any other animal on the planet. Chimpanzees can throw, but their accuracy and range is poor compared to ours. The human shoulder, arm, and hand are anatomically optimized for throwing in ways that took millions of years to develop. And rocks are everywhere. Heavy rocks, sharp rocks, rocks that can be hurled from a distance that keeps you safely outside the range of claws and teeth. There's a reason throwing rocks sounds like a childish, primitive thing. It is ancient. It is primal. But against an animal that has never in its evolutionary history encountered consistent projectile attacks from a species standing 30 meters away, a coordinated group of humans hurling stones is genuinely novel, genuinely dangerous, and deeply confusing for the predator involved. You can't evolve a defense against something your species has never encountered before. The rocks arrive before you even see the threat clearly. We have evidence from very early in the archaeological record that humans were modifying stones into tools, and some of those tools were almost certainly used as weapons. By the Middle Stone Age in Africa, roughly 300,000 to 30,000 years ago, we have beautifully crafted projectile points. Small, light, symmetrical, designed to be mounted onto spear shafts and eventually worked into early bow and arrow technology. The moment you can reliably attack from 20 or 30 meters away, the entire predator-prey dynamic shifts in a way that cannot be overstated. You are no longer prey. You are something categorically different, something that a cave lion has no behavioral response to, because nothing in its evolutionary history prepared it for this. And this leads to the most dramatic shift in the relationship between humans and large predators, which happens slowly but with enormous and irreversible consequence. We stopped just surviving predators. We started killing them deliberately, systematically. This is not a small thing. For most of the history of life on Earth, the position of apex predator belonged to things that were not us. But early humans, armed with coordinated group hunting, fire, tools, projectile weapons, and the ability to share tactical knowledge across generations, began to fundamentally challenge that hierarchy. We have evidence of early humans killing large predators, not by accident, not in desperate self-defense situations, but deliberately and repeatedly. There are archaeological sites with accumulated bones of cave lions and other large carnivores suggesting they were hunted for their hides, their teeth as trophies or tools, and almost certainly as a form of active competition removal. You kill the thing that's competing with you for prey, and you wear its skin while you do it, which is, if we're being honest, extremely metal. The megafaunal extinctions that swept across the world as human populations migrated and expanded are the most dramatic evidence of this shift. Wherever humans arrived in significant numbers, across the Americas following the end of the last glacial maximum, into Australia tens of thousands of years ago, into island environments across the Pacific, large animals began disappearing at a rate and scale that dwarfs the normal background extinction rate. Not all of this was direct predation. Climate change played a role, habitat disruption played a role. The introduction of new diseases to isolated animal populations probably played a role, but the correlation between human arrival and megafaunal collapse is striking, geographically consistent, and very difficult to explain away as coincidence. We didn't just learn to avoid predators. We restructured the ecosystems we entered. There's something quietly staggering about that trajectory. The cave lion terrified our ancestors for hundreds of thousands of years. It is now extinct. The short-faced bear that could hit 40 miles per hour? Gone. The dire wolf? Gone. The woolly mammoth, the woolly rhinoceros, the giant ground sloth? Gone, gone, gone. An entire cast of megafauna that defined the world our ancestors lived in for most of human prehistory, now existing only as fossils and the occasional jaw-dropping cave painting. And while we should absolutely be careful not to be too triumphant about a process that was, ecologically, frequently catastrophic and represents a genuine loss to the planet's biodiversity, it does illustrate something profound about the arc of human development. We were prey. And then, with extraordinary slowness, and then, with accelerating speed, we were not. But let's come back to the day-to-day reality, because the big evolutionary picture is only part of the story. What was it actually like, moment to moment, to live in a world full of things that wanted to eat you? The honest answer is that it shaped everything, completely, in ways we still carry in our bodies and our minds today. Sleeping arrangements, early humans sought elevated positions wherever possible. Cliff faces with single-entry caves, rock overhangs, trees with branches wide enough to sleep on, in regions where that was feasible. The defensible sleeping position wasn't a luxury preference. It was the difference between waking up and not. Timing of movement. Most large predators are crepuscular or nocturnal, meaning they're most active at dawn, dusk, and through the night. Early humans pushed strongly toward daytime activity, patterns, and used fire to extend the safe zone into darkness. The campfire wasn't just cozy. It was a technology that reclaimed the nighttime hours from the things that owned them. The feeling of being watched from somewhere you can't identify? That's an ancient early warning system, not a quirk. The discomfort many people feel having their back to a room or sitting with no wall behind them? That's the part of your brain that is still, at some level, running predator detection software written hundreds of thousands of years ago and never fully uninstalled. You are, in a very real sense, a savanna animal living in an apartment, and your nervous system hasn't fully gotten the memo that the cave lions are gone. And perhaps the most remarkable thing of all is how completely we've flipped the equation. Today, there are more than 8 billion humans on Earth. The large predators that once hunted our ancestors are now, almost without exception, the ones who need our protection. Lions are listed as vulnerable. Tigers are endangered. We build wildlife corridors and nature preserves and run international conservation programs to keep these animals alive. We pay significant amounts of money to observe them safely from vehicles or across fence lines. We put them on conservation posters. We make documentaries celebrating their power and beauty. The animals that kept our ancestors up at night, staring into the dark, listening to every sound in the underbrush with their hearts pounding, we now manage their survival. That is a reversal so complete it would be almost impossible to explain to any human who lived through the actual predator-saturated world of 50,000 years ago. The relationship between humans and the predators that shaped us has entirely inverted, and it happened through something that no cave lion or short-faced bear could have anticipated, adapted to, or countered in any meaningful way. Not strength, not speed, not venom, or natural armor, or body size, but minds, collective minds. Minds that could share information, build on each other's discoveries, remember and transmit the past, and imagine solutions that didn't yet exist. Our ancestors didn't survive because they were the toughest things in the forest. They were not. They were soft, slow, clawless, and in many cases quite delicious by the accounts of the predators that hunted them. They survived because they were the smartest, the most cooperative, the most adaptable, and the most culturally sophisticated organisms the planet had yet produced. They survived because when one person figured out that fire keeps cave hyenas at a distance, everyone learned it within days. When one person figured out that a shaped stone point on the end of a spear dramatically extends your reach and your lethality, the whole group started making them. When the elder remembered that the river bend was deadly at dusk, that knowledge lived in the community's story long after the individual who learned it the hard way was gone. They survived, in short, because of everything that makes us human. The connection, the communication, the almost absurd stubbornness about staying alive and passing on what we know to the next generation. And every time you feel completely outmatched by something, by a problem that's too fast, too big, too overwhelming to handle on your own, maybe it helps to remember that your direct ancestors sat outside a cave in the dark, listening to a cave lion pace the perimeter with nothing between them and it but a fire in each other, and figured out how to get through to morning, and then the next night, and the night after that, and eventually across thousands of generations of nights exactly like that one, they turned the whole situation around entirely. Not bad for a species with no claws.